So this webinar series, we're in our 5th year, Tammy, I think, maybe our 6th year. And it's called Engaging All Learners in the Middle Years. And session 1 had Shelley Moore, Belinda Chi, MJ Maidenwalt. And our previous session to this one, we had Brad Baker and Leona Prince and Katie Marin, who's here today, as well as Sarah Elson Hagen. And today, we're so thrilled to have Shane Safir, Ashley Watson, Kendra Jacobs, and Bonnie Lynn Donovan. And we're going to share some of our pedagogical practice with you and a few big ideas. We're just so glad we're here. And we want to acknowledge the support of the Rural Education Advisory in organizing this series, and also the province of British Columbia through the Ministry of Education and Childcare. Over to Tammy.
Good day, respected friends. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm Zooming from the traditional territory of the Hulkaminam speaking people. Specifically where I am right now, where my office is at the Kwametsin Village site. We're so grateful to have you here today and would love if you would like to enter and acknowledge the territories that you're Zooming from today. We know that the work that we're digging into today and looking at today always centers on our own personal commitment to truth and reconciliation, better understanding space and privilege and opportunity. And we're really grateful to have you with us today.
Thanks, Tammy. So here I am, your co-host, along with Tammy Renyard today. And last session, I talked a little bit about the concept tumhulauch, which comes from Instilchin, the language of the Syilx. And from that knowledge system, this idea is that we are the land and the land is us. And so when we think about land acknowledgements and understanding from Indigenous perspective, our local Indigenous perspective, it helps us understand our responsibility and our connection and our reciprocity with place. And so land acknowledgement is not something that we just do formally at this time. It's something that we're hopefully always doing, which is how are we connected to this place and how is this place part of us? And how can we engage in stewardship in this place? In our previous session, we had Leona Prince. And so she talked a little bit about Be a Good Ancestor and her new book that's coming out as well. But it really also helps us think about in today's session about the work that we're doing is not just ours, it's collective work. And it's not just connected to us now, but how we can leave this place in the future and the contributions that we can make, and helping every student see that they are a contributor, a change maker, and a good ancestor. And the questions that Leona left us with last time were, when you think about the idea of authentic voice in the classroom, whose voices are being centered? She also asked us, how are you meaningfully and purposely bringing diverse voices into your teaching and the learning in your spaces? And so we're really building on that work today. And we're just so grateful that Shane Safir is here. Shane, thank you for finding some time for us. I'm sure you're like, why did I answer that text from Leyton? But Shane, we're just so grateful for your work and your friendship. And you know that we think of you as an extension of us in the work in BC because you're part of the work in BC. So we're going to pass over to you for now.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, hello. Thank you for joining us for this hour and a half of thinking and learning and growing and really just humaning together in an incredibly complex time to be a human being. I'm really honored to be invited to join you and to share a little bit about the project I've been working on for the last 2 years, a book that will be published this August by the same publisher as my previous book, Street Data, and it's called Pedagogy's A Voice, Street Data and the Path to Student Agency. And so in this little bit of time I have, I just want to kind of make some connections between engaging all learners and this framework, this concept of Pedagogy's A Voice, and see where we get. So I am joining you today from the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo speaking people, the Ohlone people. I'm in Oakland, California. And this book is actually a collective labor of love with 3 people who I now consider my family, who may pop in today: Marlo Bagsik, Dr. Savsun Jabber, and Crystal Watson. And it is sort of a sequel in a way to Street Data. For those of you who may have heard of the last book I worked on, chapter 5 of that book is about student agency and about a pedagogy of student voice. And so this book is a amplification of that chapter into its own whole kind of book with 10 chapters. And the way that we define pedagogies of voice in the book early on is a sort of encompassing of both our ways of being and then specific moves that we can make as educators that awaken student voices, student agency, and intellectual development. And it's also an approach to addressing inequities through centering the voices of our learners who are at the margins, which is a core concept from street data. So this is the kind of ethos of the book and what we try to write about over time. But I would be remiss by not first acknowledging what it is like and has been like to write this book in the moment that we're in, where, you know, lots of children are finding their voices, including some with incredible privilege. In this quote here, apparently saying, "You're not the president and you need to go away." This little boy on the left, if you haven't heard about that recent comment, that's the son of Elon Musk. And the reality that so many children in the States right now are terrified of going to school because of ICE raids and deportation. And it's creating, my ex-partner and dear friend teaches at a high school here for all newcomers, and their attendance is down dramatically just because of the level of fear that so many kids are facing. I think for our trans and non-binary youth here in the States, and I know some of this bleeds over to BC and the provinces as well, there's a lot of you know, just really, really terrifying attacks happening and kind of dehumanization and a sense of not really belonging to the American story and maybe in some places the Canadian story. And then of course we've got our, you know, border wars happening, which are really exciting. So I found this picture. I was like, here we are. And I hear that there may be a move to just integrate California into Canada, which I'm all for if you guys will take us. Anyway. Side note, this is all to say that it's a very complex time, again, to be a human, to be an educator, and certainly to be a child, and to try to figure out, who am I amidst all of this? And particularly if I'm a child who has marginalized identities, what does it mean to find my voice, to use my voice? Am I even safe to do that? And so the core kind of model at the heart of this book is the agency model, and it's adapted from street data. It looks a little different if you read it there. And it's this idea that all of our pedagogy can really be oriented toward the awakening of student identity, belonging, inquiry, and efficacy. And I'm going to walk through each of those just briefly because it's just a taster today. But first, I want to invite my dear friend Tammy to come off mute and read this quote from Street Data about agency.
Okay. Agency doesn't emerge in a vacuum, nor does it flourish in a traditional classroom where the teacher is positioned as a content expert dishing out knowledge. It emerges in a learning space where power is distributed, knowledge is democratized, diverse perspectives are welcomed, and children are intellectually and emotionally nourished.
Thank you, Tammy. So think about what words stand out to you from that definition of sort of agency and the conditions that are needed to nourish the fruit of agency in our children, our beloved babies. And what I'd like to do is just walk through each of the domains briefly, starting with identity. So identity in the book is defined as, you know, every child's ability to say that their ways of being and knowing and learning are valued in our classrooms. And there's a credo for every pedagogy, every chapter in the book. And the one here is that every part of you is welcome here, even those without words. So imagine how our children would feel if they could walk into a classroom and really feel that all of who they are is welcome. They don't have to explain or silence or justify any part of who they are. And then we're thinking in the book with you all about, you know, how do we design pedagogy that makes that possible? What does that look like? And so we're writing here about storyorientation, pedagogies that really center story, which is so, I've learned so much from Indigenous pedagogy about the role of story, certainly micro affirmations, ways of really affirming and nourishing children. And one of the kind of design questions in this part of the book is, how will learners be invited to share who they are and their lived experiences in our classrooms every day? And you'll get to see some of that in the stories that come later today. Just two quick examples of what that can look like. There's a practice called identity mandalas in the book that in our book is adapted from the work of Dr. Banham at University of Oahu. And I've actually used this model, a version of it, in connection with the Salish Weave as well in Saanich with educators there. And it's just a beautiful chance for young people to talk about their roots, their relationships, their hopes and beliefs, important events, and kind of who they are. And here's one example in the book from an incredible educator, Jessica Wei Wong. I'm actually going to put her website in here because you can find a whole scaffold to the tool if this is something you might want to try with your kiddos in her resources page. And so you can see what it's like to really bring, invite children to bring their stories to life through protocols like this. And all of this storyintation and kind of identity work is tethered to a core idea in the book of abundance, that when we hold deep an abundance mindset, then we act from this deep understanding that our children are coming with so many gifts and so many funds of knowledge. And we ground ourselves in honoring those gifts, right? And really focusing on what are the things that they know, rather than focusing on what are the problems that we have to solve or the things they don't know or can't do yet. Just orient ourselves toward possibility and toward abundance. And I think you'll get to see that in the stories that Ashley and Leyton and Kendra and Bonnie Lynn share a little bit later as well. The second domain is belonging. And belonging, classrooms rooted in belonging, the way we talk about in the book is that every child walking into our spaces would be able to say, I see myself here and I'm seen and loved here. And the credo is really simple. You are seen and loved here, exactly as you are, right? This is a space that you belong to. So one of the ways that I wanted to investigate this for the book was to ask some younger students. These are third graders in New Mexico in a classroom of a teacher contributor named Alessa Ibanez. And we did a discussion online. What do they think belonging is? So let's listen to their answers.
What does it mean to you to belong? And what does belonging mean? So think about it.
Community.
Say more.
Community and sharing together. Wow.
Maria?
Like in a group, if you don't feel like you belong, they can make you feel like you belong. Or maybe like go into a group that you think that's right for you. Yeah.
So then when you say that makes you feel good, what are those things for you when you go into a group that makes you feel good? What do you look for?
When they're nice, and they're respecting
During
you.
lunchtime.
Respectful?
Respecting people. Respecting people. And for them to be really, really nice to you.
Okay, so
And
when
them to be not mean.
so when they're being nice, respectful with you. Okay. And then we'll go on to Hazel.
It's being part of our community and sharing.
And Sophia.
That you feel like you actually belong there, and that you're loved and that you're listened to.
Beautiful.
You have to like share what you have to share what you feel, and then they'll know.
I just love those babies. They're so precious. So I invite you to think about really what belonging means to you and what might you learn if you ask that question of your students. Perhaps you have already, but great opportunity to kind of check in and get their take on it. And
What does it mean?
think about belonging. One of the questions we invite readers to wrestle with is, what do I want learners not just to learn and master in terms of content or even skills, but what do I want my learners to feel and to experience through this learning process, right? What are the kind of experiential outcomes of my lesson design or my assessment design? And in these chapters, we talk about circle pedagogy, we talk about radical inclusion. Leyton wrote some beautiful pieces of the chapter about belonging. And it's just some really exciting content that we'll get to offer you soon. And I think I just wanted to name, from an article that touched me a lot by these scholars, Douglas and Nganga, that the culture of schooling is not a neutral culture, right? Where every child naturally finds a sense of belonging. Teachers we, all of us, have to carry a disposition in our practice that enacts an inviting space for every child, particularly for those who've been traditionally marginalized. We offer a chapter in which we really unpack these 10 toxins that can exist in the soil of our classrooms, that if we want to be oriented towards student voice and student agency, we have to become more aware of these toxins. We have to start to expunge them, whether it's deficit thinking about children, whether it's, sort of one and done assessment. Okay, you're done, let's move on. Whether it's competitiveness or really power over, which can show up in so many ways. And those are coupled with 10 ways of being that we offer in the next chapter that we can kind of hold on to and practice and espouse as we move toward student voice. And that abundance I talked about already, vulnerability on the other side, is so important to being able to shift toward a pedagogy of voice, as well as listening and curiosity and so many other pieces here. So in the interest of time, I want to just briefly talk about inquiry and efficacy, and then ask you all a question. For inquiry, we're thinking about children's ability to ask questions about the world, to build knowledge in increasingly complex ways. How do we communicate to them that your ideas really, really matter here? And, really designing lessons around ideas and questions that children want to explore, which I know a lot of you do already. The core pedagogies here are questions over answers and feedback over grades. And we're going to go back for 1 minute to our same babies, where I asked them, what are some of the big questions you have about the world you live in? A big question that you have about something in the world that you really want to learn about. It could be anything: science, math, history, language, culture, family, society, whatever. But I just want to hear, what are some of those questions that light you up?
Okay, Hazel?
Where do the plates sometimes hit and it creates an
So say it again.
that why when the plates hit each other, why does it create an earthquake?
Ooh,
Emma.
Do the planets die?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Do planets die?
Why, when you put Mentos into a Coca-Cola, it makes a whole explosion?
when you put Mentos in. That's a great one. And Milo?
Why on the Earth, as you go deeper and deeper into it, does it get hotter and hotter?
I love that entire conversation. It was such a great reminder to me that kids are just genius, and they're bubbling with curiosity, and they have a million questions. And at the end, I'm not going to play this part, but I asked Alessa, who's a wonderful second-year teacher, were you surprised by anything? And she said, yeah, I've never heard them talk about these things. And I said, do you think, is there space in your class for the students to explore some of these questions? And she said, there really normally isn't, but now I want to create that space. And that was an exciting moment as a thought partner to her, to really just get her to slow down enough to really get to marinate and get excited about what kids are excited about. The last piece of the book is really around efficacy, and this idea that children can make a difference around what matters to them. And that can be on such a small level of the classroom, but that can also be in the community, in the province, in the nation. We're going to see a beautiful example from Ashley and Leyton and Bonnie's work of this. I think just thinking about how we design learning experiences, again, where we're really orienting towards students' ability to impact the world around them, right? Getting out of the classroom, being active in their learning, applying concepts to real world issues, ecology, all these things you're going to get to see today. And so I'll close by just saying there are 8 pedagogies of voice. I've mentioned a couple of them today. Each agency domain is connected to 2, and lots of examples. There are design tools in the book that you'll get to see. If you're interested in knowing more about the book, that QR code is like a pre-ordering thing. I think there's like a raffle connected to that, if I'm correct. So I'll leave it there for 1 second if people want to grab it. And then what I want to close with is actually an excerpt of voices of educators across North America. At least one, if not two of these folks are from Canada, that we got to interview when we were beginning to write the book. And we asked them a question, which is, what needs to be said today about student voice and agency? Why is this important? And I'm going to ask you that same question before I sign off. So first, let's hear a couple of their voices and then give you a chance to chat your thoughts.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up.
One of the things I think maybe teachers especially are like, you're so prone to dissociate your true self, your true identity from the work. A lot of times, speaking for myself and what I see in my school and in other schools I've taught in, like there's this generic identity that you have to, it's performative, like you have to present yourself as what you think your principal, your superintendent, what everybody else wants you to be. But that's not what brings the students in. Like students, I find, are more willing to engage if they feel like you're being your authentic self. Like, they start to perform also if they feel like that's what you want.
The toll that COVID has had on our world and on students and learning in every possible way, like that there is no returning to normal. The idea that we can return to this pre-state, it's had all sorts of ripple effects. And so I think also combined with that, like I feel like there were twin pandemics. There was both the COVID and then there was the murder of George Floyd. So those two things together, I think like ripped things open. And our youth today, I feel like when they're asked about the future, like they're really scared.
Truths need to be told, not to provoke people, but to awaken them. And that's really important. So my grandmother always says, be careful what you say because you only say it once. You want to say it in a way that is going to call somebody in rather than call somebody out related to this. And so, and when I think about student voice, it's we have to stop asking them without not preparing to do something about them, but actually hearing them means that we're actually creating them, holding space as equitable decision makers that actually without their help, we can't do it. And we can't imagine what the solution or the fix or anything can be. It's not our job, nothing about them without them. So like, for example, when I was just hiring a district VP for Indigenous education, a student was on the hiring committee table. When we're having Indigenous education committee or circles structures, a third of the seats are students. We don't want to imagine a future of what needs to transform in education unless we are actually valuing their voice in such a way that they are actually sitting at the table and actually being valued for what they can contribute.
All right. You may know Robert, he's actually a superintendent now in the northern part of the province. Before we move to a waterfall chat, I just saw my sibling Marlo Bagsik here, and I'm going to invite him to hop off mute and just say hi to you all. He actually curated the video you just saw. He's a huge part of the book that'll be in your hands soon. So Marlo, you want to say a quick hi?
Yes, hi everyone. It's just so amazing to always be amongst educators. Hello. I just love you all so much. You just inspire me, and that's what's inspired the book. Just really a book for you all, because I'm an educator too, and I'm a teacher. So lovely being invited to your space. So thank you for having me for this short time.
Thank you for being here, Marlo. So chat waterfall, if everybody could get into the chat, but don't press return yet, just take a moment to think about what arises for you when you hear this question. What do you believe needs to be said today about student voice and agency? And I will count you down to the return button in just a second. All right, I know not everybody's probably done, but we're going to go with it. So counting down, if you could press return in 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to go up. How to amplify the quieter voices. Beautiful question, Megan. I love that. Authenticity, that students need to feel like we are listening to them and honoring and valuing them. Beautiful. Students make decisions. Adults remove barriers. Yes. Tammy, I think this was meant for everybody, so I'm going to read it. Center student voice with connection and care. that students deserve to develop their voice and have opportunities to contribute to their world. Donna says we need to model respectful ways of making our voices heard and invite students into the conversation rather than dictate. Love it. And we're paying extra attention to whose voices are being heard is essential to keep our kids at the center. Making sure all voices are heard, even non-speaking voices, yes, should be part of the conversation. Needing to be heard and valued, nothing about them without them, whole person connections. Lisa says, recent former students also need to be asked how things have gone since leaving the system. Love it. And allowing student voice to feel valued. Beautiful. Thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it back to Leyton and Tammy. I so appreciate the opportunity to share some of this very fresh, not even off the press, just new work with you all, and take it away.
Oh, Shane and Marlo, thank you so much for sharing. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see and read the book. Love how there's that thread from street data through and so many opportunities for engagement. Really can't wait to see it. So thank you. Leyton, over to you and your fantastic team.
Thank you, Shane, for setting us up so beautifully. We're really delighted that we were able to contribute this example to the book, and it kind of forced us to step back. And Violet and Ashley and I had to go back and find our photos and our notes and what really happened. We're really delighted to share this example and hope that it helps you think about what you might do in your context. We just want to note that the seal don't put a capital S in front of their name in their language, and so we have honored that and used a small s to acknowledge the seal. And this work happened on seal territory. So Ash and I are going to talk about how this started, and then Violet's going to comment a little bit later. But Ash, why don't you just describe our book club?
We have a wonderful group of, as Leyton likes to call them, fro-leagues, that educators who we've worked together for quite a while that come together and in our extra time read professional literature that just fills our soul as educators. And so it was just Leyton and I were obviously together in the book club and reading these. We just felt so inspired by Shane's book, actually, as we were reading it, and together came up with the idea with how can we look at this group of grade 5 students and what can we take from Shane's book talking about student agency and giving our kids voice and connecting them back with the land. And that's kind of how it all began, with Shane's book and coming together in our book club.
Ashley and I done some things together in our class over the years, but we'd never had a chance to say, how do we center Indigenous knowledge, and how does, in our case, local Syilx perspectives, how can that inform what we're doing? And so it began with the reading and those ideas of agency and belonging. And then we looked to the local Syilx knowledge system and these central ideas of reciprocity at the center of Syilx understandings, as well as the idea that every voice matters. And so there is no word in Tsiltchin or any other BC Indigenous language for disability. It's that every child has gifts and every voice matters. And so we thought, how can we cultivate some reciprocity and some student agency and voice? And so we thought making it connected to land and to place and centering the Syilx perspective. And so we looked at the curriculum, in particular science and language arts, and a little bit of social studies. And we came up with how are living things interconnected as this overarching question for the rest of the year. Anything you want to add there, Ash?
No, I think that's a great start to kind of how the seed started.
So Anona Campi is a knowledge holder in our region who does some work throughout the Southern Okanagan and the Central Okanagan. And so Ashley, you want to describe how Anona works with your school?
Yeah, we were so fortunate that Anona came into our classroom, and she came with us to share the story of the 4 food chiefs. So we've spent time both professionally doing some learning with her, and then also her coming in and doing some learning with the kids. So she came into our class and it started with the story coming from her.
And so this traditional story introduces us to the 4 food chiefs and to fly. And really it shows that even annoying fly has something to offer. And so everyone has something to offer and every voice matters. And this foundational knowledge system story then influenced us to think about how all of our voices matter and what can we do to contribute. You want to talk a little bit about that little book?
Yeah, and I think just building off as Leighton started us, like the kids, we kind of jumped in and we like to embed and weave in literacy into the all day, every day. So what you see here is the kids coming together. And at this time we had the kids have their own book boxes where they keep their good fit books. So at this time we came and they were sharing stories that they had connected to, their favorite parts of the stories. And it was such an excellent opportunity just to see the kids taking ownership of themselves as readers and such a sense of joy and engagement. And it was really amazing because it's always great to peek in their book boxes to see, what their interests are and what they like to keep in there. But as our learning progressed together, how the texts that they started to collect, because they like to hoard favorite books in their book box, started to transform into more nonfiction texts that connected to our learning of, like Anona had talked about the 4 food chiefs, and they started making text-to-text connections that way, and to the land and some of the other topics that we'll cover in this. But then they really became the experts that would be so excited about sharing what they had learned or what they had read with one another.
We made a big book bin of every book, article, comic, graphic novel, or a piece of something text that we could find related to environment, land, and the local silk perspective. And so we invited kids as we worked our way through this unit. It was more like a swath than a unit. But then they found things they really loved and added them to their book box so they could read and become experts on along the way.
Well, and I think you say something important. It wasn't so much a unit, it was just became a part of like our classroom community and culture. Like the learning was so embedded to just how we were being together. And Leyton this was such a great learning opportunity for myself as well. And reading, Leyton shared with us the text I Know Here, and learning about the kids' place and them connecting to what places do you connect to most with your family, and spots that you have made important memories, and about the land that our school's on, and noticing the living things. And it was a really eye-opening experience for them, noticing, really being thoughtful about what places were important to them, and also noticing the connections between their places amongst one another.
That became kind of our launch, everybody. It's kind of like multiple launches. Anona launched, and then their books. Like, here's a bunch of things we could read. And then we anchored this idea that we all know some places that are special to us that we know the best, but we can also learn about our place here and how we're connected to this place. So after we looked at I Know Here, Ashley and I had kind of looked at across all this idea around interconnectedness and scientists and local things, what are some key words that we really want to explore? And so we gave kids piles of these words, and then they had to create, they had to word sort them and create their own categories. You can have 3 or 4 categories, but how do you think these words go together? And they were moving them and debating. There was a lot of moving, and you can see the group in the far right who love the far corner were like with their clipboards, really navigating and negotiating, but it really just kind of was like secret teaching everybody, which is like playing with these key ideas. And how do we think they go together, and coming up with our own titles for them? And underneath this led us into working with a couple anchor texts that were really short. I'll show it on the next screen, but they had these words in them. But before we even read the text, we already were familiar with them. And they were like, oh my goodness, I already know this word. We already did this one. But it all connected to this idea that living things sense and respond.
And I think too, how it just brought out like what a wealth of like their knowledge, what amazing background knowledge these kids have. And just you could see the confidence in some who maybe hadn't shone in other areas, that all of a sudden they're like, okay, I know about this. I've got lots, and let me take the lead and show you how we put these ideas together.
So then we moved into a shared piece of text. And I found 3 little pieces from this, the 10 most. And what we love about this is it's so accessible. So it's for the middle years, but it's written in a way that's quite accessible so everybody can get into it. And then we use some strategies to find out some information. Already we were familiar with the language, but we taught them some strategies, and they worked in partners to find these key ideas. Of course, Ashley and I modeled what that looked like first, which they found hilarious, because they were like, why don't you two agree? You're the adults. And we're like, well, I think this is most important. Ashley's like, well, that's not most important to me. Or my favorite is when Ashley just throws it back to me. What do you think, Mr. Schnellert? I'm like, what do you think, Mrs. Watson? She's like, no, what do you think, Mr. Schnellert? So we really tried to model there's not one right answer, but what can you pull out that you think is important? Ashley, I think there's a core strategy that we were using in here.
Yeah, for this, we had used some of Adrienne Gear's work in her nonfiction reading power text. And so we had done some work around how do we identify keywords in a text and take those and turn it into tying it into literacy, our own piece of writing where we can take that information. So the kids they would find the keywords and all of the, like Leyton said, we had quite all of the articles were different. So then in the end, after they had found their keywords, done like their little summary on it, they came back and again got to share what they learned. So it was a great opportunity to learn again from one another.
We literally could not keep track of the articles because everybody kept sticking them in their book boxes. So I'm like, where did this go? And so they were negotiating. I want this one next. And so we had 10 different articles. They were working in pairs, but then they could add them to their book boxes and trade and find ideas as they were researching. So then we went to the floodplain. And so before we went to our first, we became story ready and place ready in terms of doing that work. So we thought about like, what could we learn from this place that we're going to visit, this floodplain that we're going to go visit? We have to get on a bus to go there. And then what are the animals that are endangered there? And so Ashley and I did a little bit of work about finding about some of the endangered animals in the local floodplain. And then we really thought about how can we get ready for this visit? How can we engage with Indigenous scientists and knowledge holders and the land in really kind of respectful and honoring ways? And so we did a little get ready, do done to kind of get ourselves ready before we went. How could we be there? We're so excited, but how could we engage with that in like really respectful ways as scientists and as learners and as community members? Over to you, Bonnie Lynn.
Tanshe, bon après midi. So I said hello and good afternoon in my own Michif language. So I think it's important to give you some background. So Si'il people are salmon people. So the Si'il are my husband's people. And one of their 4 food chiefs is Intiti, or Chinook salmon. And Intiti is chief of all water beings. And so there is a connection between the how food was given, which is the Chaptik, the Si'il story that was shared with the grade 4-5 students. And in the early 20th century, Kasit, which is the true name of Okanagan River, was straightened, narrowed, and diked. And then a dam was also constructed to regulate the flow from Katlusinitk, which is the true name of Okanagan Lake, into Kasitk, into the Okanagan River. So channelization of Kasitk isolated the river from the floodplain, and that resulted in the loss of 50% of the river's original length and the loss of 93% of adjacent riparian or streamside habitat. So until the introduction of dams and the loss of cottonwood riparian ecosystems, salmon was a primary food source for my husband's people and central to their trade systems. And so then when the Okanagan River was disconnected from its floodplain, it couldn't perform its ecological function. And then when the dams were built, it altered the riverbed from gravel, which is ideal for salmon nests, to larger cobbles and sand, which is not ideal. So by the 1990s, the future of Okanagan salmon was in question. And so the Si'il people responded, and so they have several initiatives to restore the historical range of sockeye in the upper Okanagan watershed, in Okanagan Lake and Skaha Lake. And so Kimchinitk, the floodplain restoration project, means alongside the water. That was a multi-year restoration project. It began in 2015. And so Si'il traditional ecological knowledge was supported by Western science. And in collaboration, those sciences were used to restore historic floodplain and riparian area of Kasitk on the Penticton Indian Reserve. So the intent of the restoration project was to aid in the recovery of at-risk populations of many species of cultural significance to Si'il people, including but not limited to salmon, various birds, insects, reptiles, and amphibians. Next slide, please. So the lead conservation ecologist for Kimchinit really made education outreach a priority. And here, these are photos of an opening circle, and everyone was asked to identify what their favorite animal was as a icebreaker and getting to know you. So they also learned about the importance of cottonwood forests and how cottonwood forests are key habitat for a number of species at risk. And they learned that one of the ways that cottonwood contributes is crows will make a nest, and then it'll be taken over by an owl the following year. And so they also learned about pulau, pocket gophers, and how pocket gophers demonstrate reciprocity, pocket gopher style, by leaving these mounds of dirt because they aerate the soil. And then those mounds create an opportunity for new plant growth. And so they learned a lot about the actual floodplain itself as well, and how the water is kept cool during the heat of summer, which is a critical factor for fish and especially for Chinook salmon, and how the overhanging trees and shrubs provide the organic matter that then becomes part of the food chain, and those microorganisms and little small invertebrates, they become food for insects and larger creatures. And so they learned about that, and how the floodplain really is designed to give the Chinook salmon something other fish don't necessarily need, which is an opportunity to have a pool where they can grow and they can fatten up and eat those insects, and then go out into the lake and then further into the ocean. So multiple site visits were encouraged, where students could engage in a variety of guided experiential activities. And so students had opportunities to be part of the beginning of the restoration project, where they helped prepare the floodplain for plantings and removing invasive species. And then, like, for example, a high school teacher, she brought students in grade 10, and then they returned in grade 11, and they could help with propagating seeds from indigenous plants. And then the following year, they could then help with the planting, and then some of the follow-up care that was necessary. And so here they're talking about symbiotic relationships. And so conservation ecology defines it as long-term interactions between two different species, where at least one organism benefits from the association. And here, Ashley students are helping to plant some indigenous plant seeds. And with the restoration project, they really made an effort to propagate indigenous plants locally. So they didn't purchase commercially produced seeds or seedlings. They had a separate greenhouse that they did all the propagation in. And so all of the seeds came from the plant relatives in the surrounding area. So for example, wild rosebush, trees that love the water, like types of willows and cottonwood, etc. So here the students are actually planting showy milkweed seeds along the bank. And so part of that symbiotic relationship that they learned about was how the monarch butterflies have developed a resistance to the toxin in milkweed, which gives their caterpillars a strong chemical defense against predators. And then the milkweed plants, they then can grow back faster after the monarch caterpillars have eaten them.
So this was our first visit, everybody. Could you imagine being like on the floodplain, learning this information, finding things out, and then getting to plant milkweed? And that was also the year that we heard on the news on CBC that the monarchs were going extinct. And so here they learned that if we planted showy milkweed, we could return this native plant to its place, but also help the monarchs come back and be part of it. And so as we rode home on the bus, I invited kids to write down, what are all the species that you learned about today? And they were like, we're writing on the bus. I'm like, we have to remember this, everybody. And so we're writing about all the things we remembered. And then they had to write about an exciting event or an exiting event in the case of Emily. But she's like, the dust devil was so exciting, but we also planted the milkweed. And then they have to talk about how was the channel before colonization and what does it look like now? And so they really talked about that they've straightened the floodplain and that's caused a problem for the salmon. And then they had to write to Michael, the conservation ecologist, to say, what did we learn from him? So then we go to Harrison's on the right. And Harrison, who likes to do as little as possible, but has so much going on in his brain, turned over the paper and look what he wrote, everybody. So here's what he said. It all started when we got off the bus. We had made it. It was very windy. So our guide brought us to the place where there was less wind, and then we ate a snack. I also set up my picnic blanket for me, Oliver, Jason, Jasper after we ate. We learned how to introduce ourselves to the land. Then we got to have some free time to explore. I went straight to the pond and tried to find some frogs and salamanders. After that, we sat back down on the blanket and learned more about endangered species and why they were endangered. Then he passed around pictures of animals native to the land. Then we grabbed some lunch and looked under some wooden crates to see if there were any animals in them, but all we found were a spider, a beetle, and a cricket. Then we went to sit back down and we were hit by a huge dust devil. And Jace lost a little choke cherry seed he found on the ground. Then we moved to a different location to plant some milkweed to help the monarch butterflies. To plant milkweed, you need to dig a small hole, sprinkle some seeds in, and cover it up with dirt, and you're done. Then somebody who comes to return a snake to the wild, which was very cool. That's what happened next. Somebody brought us a snake, and that was really exciting for the kids. Then we said goodbye, and we left. The end. And so we're just writing about and recalling what we have, but we're also writing to Michael because we've got some voice when we're like writing to somebody. Ashley, over to you.
And then when we came back in the class, in our classroom, we had a lot, like we were always using materials and finding ways to build provocations to represent our learning or make connections. And so they decided that they wanted to build a provocation to represent our time on the floodplain because we knew that we would be going back. And so I had pulled out like a small table and put it in the middle of the carpet and a bunch of like natural materials that I had found. And then they together like instantly gravitated towards all the materials, started picking them up and rebuilding their version of the floodplain. And it's harder to tell in a picture, but every material that they put on there was like meticulously thought out and put down to like the crates they were talking about, like these little crates in the land where you could lift it up and there was like spiders in it. So we had little insects, but it was just as the teacher to hear them like to negotiate and to collaborate and represent that their learning in that way was really quite a neat experience to listen in on. And they were completely independent in creating and initiating and putting that together.
So we did some thinking with them about like, so what did we learn? Because we've been introduced to the symbiotic relationships. We've been introduced to the showy milkweed. And so we just reminded them that we'd done a little bit of learning that we're going back for. And we also brought back some showy milkweed seeds. And so
these started as little tiny seeds, like they were barely anything. And one of the students in the class was our resident expert gardener. His grandpa owns a nursery near our school. And so there was concern about like, what are we going to do with these over the weekend and how are we going to get them to grow? And they started to grow a little bit. And so over the weekend, they decided to make their own versions of a greenhouse and put it in. And it was so wild how much they sprouted. And they were so excited when they came back to know, one, their Ziploc bag greenhouses had worked, but just at the amount of growth over such a short period of time.
While we were at the floodplain, after we learned about this, Aubrey's like, can we bring seeds back to our houses? And so then we asked Michael, and he's like, yes, you can. So Aubrey led the class's charge in bringing home seeds to replant in all of their yards and neighborhood parks to bring back the showy milkweed and the monarchs into their communities.
Yes, we ended up splitting the plant actually and taking it out near our school to plant it in some of the open area.
So as we move through to the next week, we wanted to keep this experience alive. And so we did some reflection in a Foursquare. And so we started with, what do you know about the river? What do you remember about the river, the channel? And then what did we learn about the Chinook salmon? We learned about 2 kinds of salmon there. And then what are we trying to do at the floodplain? And then how are things interconnected? So really coming back from that lived experience. And so here on the left-hand side, you can see the living things and the river and the Chinook salmon, but really pulling out and drawing from the vocabulary we're learning and then describing what they're trying to do. And then look at this beautiful representation. Who we got the screech owl and its relationship. And so we've got into the woodpecker. And so just what we'd learned they represent. And then Olivia was like, 4 boxes is not enough. I need 11. And so she folded her paper to even smaller pieces to kind of tell and explain even more symbiotic relationships because 2 was not enough.
And after another visit, we came back and realized that we were missing some pieces in our provocation. And so the kids decided that we were going to paint, and they ended up cutting out and then creating the plants and animals that we didn't have represented and then adding that to what we had already built together. So great to see as we went back to experience the floodplain, more that they learned and noticed, and then coming back and adding to what we had in our class.
We went for our next visit, and Violet's going to give us a little brief overview of the hatchery that we also visited on our second visit.
Hey, so the Chapelkstein hatchery, its name roughly translates to cause to come back, is a hatchery on the Penticton Indian Reserve. And so they have the capacity to rear 8 million eggs from broodstock management, which is the collection of eggs and milk from adult sockeye from the Okanagan River until fry release. And so there is this partnership between the hatchery and the floodplain restoration program, because of course, that's where they're getting the salmon to put back in the river. And so students had an opportunity to tour the hatchery. It's approximately 1 hour for the tour, and they're taken all throughout the facility, and starting with the territory, and then an explanation of how damaging the dams have been to the salmon and their return to their territory, and then talking about the respectful practices that the hatchery staff have when they do need to remove eggs and milt, and that the adult sockeye aren't just discarded, that their remains are returned to the water as an expression of gratitude. And then students got a chance to visit the incubation room where the salmon eggs are reared from fertilized egg to fry until they're ready to feed. And then again, they learned about another respectful practice where the transfer of fry from the incubation room to the outdoor rearing tank occurs when the fry swim out when they are ready. And so the staff don't handle them. The sockeye fry decide for themselves when they're ready to do that. And then staff hand feed the salmon fry in the outdoor runs. They're made out of fiberglass, and that's where they fatten up. And so that's to ensure that no food is wasted. And then so just would like people to consider, or I'd like you to invite you to consider if there are restoration research projects led by local First Nations in your area where students may be able to learn by observing and pitching in, which is a form of traditional Indigenous pedagogy.
Thanks, Bonnie Lynn. And so When we returned the second time, we first went to the hatchery and then we toured with some foci. And so the students were becoming very good at their fourfold. Hey, Ashley, where it's like, here's what goes in each box. And so they were more independent in finding things, locating things, labeling things. And they also looked at how their showy milkweed was growing. They also found some signage about what's going on about restoration of salmons. They were very proud of themselves of finding this information. And so really, they were learning how to document and look and notice and see the impact they were having. And so after that visit, they were really thinking a lot about like what's happening at the floodplain, and look at our milkweed in the class, and why is the milkweed in the class growing faster, and allow them to think about what variables can we control and not control to help and make a difference. And so we had a final visit, where students were able to come and document and show how they had seen things growing and what they noticed as different. They also got to see their impact, and they also learned that we could no longer walk in some areas because there were eggs and little babies emerging in those areas. And so we learned how things change by the season and how we engage differently in the place. We also saw the return of a turtle. First time a snake, this time a turtle, which was really meaningful and engaging. And this is the floodplain because it's not full until the spring. So the first two visits, there was no water in our little floodplain section, but they actually got to see what happens over time. And here we are adding some more native plants that we learned about in our region. And we had some friends who were like, what else can we do? And so they became in charge of the water parts. And so it really helped them find their voice and find their ownership of the space. We close by saying, we really found that returning to a place helped students learn about reciprocity and giving back, building their vocabulary. Lots of opportunities to write and engage with community members was really important. And that multimodality, sometimes we don't think about that in the middle years, but kids being able to create with the loose parts and paint and create and be there on the space and take notes was really important. And we had some friends who really showed their connections to their community. They brought in their family knowledge and their backgrounds. And we also saw some learners who were less active or very quiet in the class thrive outside and then bring that back to the class. And so just like Bonnie Lynn, we think about how can we build our relationship with place. And I think for now, where we think we're at is that kids felt agency because they felt like they made a difference. Plus they saw one monarch and they felt like they had saved the monarchs forever. So here's your reflection question before we pass on to Kendra, everybody. Just choose one for the chat box. How might you explore reciprocity with students? Or can you think of an opportunity to develop student agency in your practice? Or how are you meaningfully and purposely bringing diverse voices into your teaching and learning? So we invite you to choose one and just pop something in the chat box. Give yourself a minute and a half, and then we'll all press send. And as you're ready, we invite you to press send. Thank you, Ashley and Bonnie Lynn, for co-presenting with me and doing this exciting work together. It was so fun to relive together. And I'm going to pass the torch over to our Frawley. Oh, Bonnie, I saw your mic come on.
Oh, well, I was just going to say I learned a couple of new things about monarchs in preparation for today. One is that they are ancient insect relatives because they've been here for like a million years, and that it was only when milkweed started to grow in other parts of the world that the monarchs started to migrate to follow their milkweed.
And that reminds me of something the class learned, which is we stopped saying living things and we started saying living relatives, plant relatives, insect relatives. It really moved us from thinging to relativing.
Leyton, while Kendra is setting up, can I just quickly share something Annika has in the box so that folks can see how this could extend into grade 11? We had a group of teachers working together today. I found this so inspiring to see that connection through our work, and we're looking at considering land as text and restoration as an act of decolonization. Write, create, and share the significance of place historically, now, and in the future. And so I just see this thread from this work that younger students are doing through this work that we will have grade 11 and 12 students doing coming up. So thank you, team, for sharing that. It's really inspiring to see that through line of work through the system.
Thanks to everyone for sharing. It's so inspiring to hear all of the great stories, starting with that framework that Shane offered us and moving into that literacy science, and as Leyton said, a little bit of socials perspective. And so I'm so excited to bring a numeracy perspective to the pedagogies of voice and really digging into how we can use student voice to elevate our math classrooms. And I love to start all of my presentations with this beautiful co-created anchor chart by some grade 5 students. And it was about May, and they'd been really working deeply in a math community environment. And in May, they shared their thoughts and ideas to what mathematicians in their community do. And they shared things such as, we help other mathematicians, we share things, we're positive, and we support one another. And they really truly saw themselves each as mathematicians in their own way. And so we're going to experience that together in action. Don't run away on me. Math is not so scary. And so let's dig into how we can make it a little bit less scary for everyone. I want to honor and acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Okanagan Silk people. It's lots of beautiful snow here, and it's been a while. We've been waiting for this snow for a long time, and so I'm just so grateful for the winter and the time of rest and slowness that this snow really inspires me for. And so for our learning journey over the next about 20 to 25 minutes or so, we're going to dig into the components of thriving mathematical communities. We're going to look at a little bit of math in action, and then I'll finish off with sharing some of the talk moves that I rely on and the pedagogical choices that I have used in a multitude of learning experiences, and how I use those talk moves to bring student voice to life in the math classroom. And I'll really invite us to center ourselves back to Leyton's initial question around whose voices are being centered. And we're going to see that really come to life through the lens of mathematics throughout the next 20 minutes, and thinking about our own voices and how they might be centered in this experience. When I think of thriving mathematical communities, I think of 4 pillars. And so just like when we sit on a chair, we need all of those pillars to hold equal weight in order for the chair to do its job. And so in order for a mathematical community to thrive, each of these pillars needs to hold equal weight within its community. And so children need to see themselves and identify as mathematicians. They need to see their diverse strengths come to life through the lens of mathematics. They need to bring forward a mindset of perseverance, and that growth mindset, being able to work through challenges and problem solving. Children need to be able to communicate both orally and representationally. And so thinking about that oral communication as foundational to moving into the lens of representational communication with their thinking. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that can come to life in a math classroom. And of course, that idea of collaboration, children learning with and from one another, as well as us as educators learning with and from the children, because they always have such surprising and beautiful mathematical ideas to offer forward to our communities. The example here on the right is a pedagogical narration from a grade 5 class, that same grade 5 class that co-created that anchor chart. And they looked at what collaboration looks like and how they saw collaboration through the lens of a math game in their class. And so we can really see the voices of the children coming to life, sharing things like they're looking at the game board, they're thinking about what to do next. I see numbers, which means they're actually playing and not talking about other things. And then they wrapped it up by saying they're not playing with things on the floor. One of them isn't sitting at the table and the other sitting on the floor. They are sitting side by side, working together. And so no matter the age of the children in our spaces, when we honor their voices around what each of these pillars means to them, they will reenact those values and what they have honored in their conversations in the future throughout your classroom. And so in this class, they were able to really co-create that idea of when they collaborate, they truly do sit side by side and really dig into that math thinking together. Here's another example of identity and mindset coming to life. And this example comes from a grade 7 class, and it was inspired from the website that I've linked down below. And so the prompt is, math is like, and you can really hear the children's voices, their mindsets towards math learning here, but also you can get to know them beyond their ideas of mathematics. And so some of the things that came off here was, math is like baseball. At first, you're not accurate, but then you get better. Or math is like being a human. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. And so just such great connections. I just love this one. Math is like moving to a new house. At first, it doesn't feel like home, but soon it will. And so we can really get to know each of these learners. I'm sure that there's somebody in here who loves baseball and somebody who loves or has had the experience of moving. And so they're able to make those connections and tap into their own funds of knowledge, as well as educators, we're able to unpack where their thinking is in relation to mathematics at this point in the year. This same class then explored the mindsets that mathematicians bring and the actions that they do. So further identifying that identity as mathematicians, the teacher recorded some of the children's thinking around what mathematicians do. And so they shared things like mathematicians struggle, they practice their math, they keep learning, they solve problems. They talked about how they experiment with numbers and make mistakes and don't give up. And then the teacher provided them with an opportunity to really bring those ideas to life. And so with the clothesline examples that I've shared here, the children had to negotiate and collaborate and order the numbers from smallest to largest. And so we can even see that some of the examples, they've decided what order to put those numbers in, going from left to right or right to left. And we can imagine the negotiations that were happening and the collaboration and conversation through that experience of really just honoring that student voice and bringing to life their identities as mathematicians. And so I don't have time to dive into the whole structure of where student voice might live in a math workshop block. And so we're just going to dive into that mini lesson. And so mini lessons are a time when our whole group is coming together and really diving into some math content. And so today, as a math community, we are going to come together and dive into our own experience of bringing our math funds of knowledge together. I see Leyton's getting excited, and some of you are maybe feeling a little nervous, and that is okay, because we know that each of you has something to honor. And if you feel that you want to keep the something you have to honor to yourself today, that's a-okay. And if you would like to contribute your thoughts to the group, I'm going to welcome that as well. So stick with us and we'll dive into some math. Our goal throughout this is to get underneath children's thinking. And so we're going to get underneath our own thinking, just as the same way in a classroom, we would get underneath the thinking of the children. And we're going to really experience also what Shane was talking about with that abundance mindset. And we're going to tap into the abundance of math knowledge that we hold in this space together and see how we can create that. So let me just check. Okay, perfect. We're going to get our thinking hearts ready. Thanks to my nephew for being my thinking heart model. We're going to put our brains up and we're going to share our thinking from the heart today. And this way, in a class community, I would do this where everyone is gathered in a space, maybe on a carpet or around a whiteboard. And so this way we don't interrupt anyone's thinking when we put our hand up. Often what happens, and I have asked hundreds of children this, and they've all shared the same experience, that if someone in front of them puts a hand up, they just tend to stop thinking. They think, oh, that person has the answer, that person is going to share, so I can just wait and listen. And so when we think from our heads and our hearts and show our thinking with a thumbs up, we allow space for all learners to think at their own pace without interrupting the processing time that everyone needs to dive into the math. So today we're going to think from a thumbs up. I think Leyton might help me kind of call on some people. And then if you're open to sharing, I'll ask that you just open your hand. So that will be our symbol. And we know that you're just thinking about it and you want to keep that thinking to yourself. Or if you want to share, you can just open your hand and we'll tap into everyone's math thinking. So, all right. And our first math problem we are going to dive into today is 3 times 4. And that's a pretty easy one for us to get into together. And so maybe just type into the chat or someone can unmute 3 times 4. What is it? We'll just warm up our brains. Okay, so I've got lots of agreement around 12. So does someone want to share how they knew it was 12? Oh, nice, Tammy. Thanks, Tammy. 3 groups of 4. Okay, so I'm just going to create us a model to work from here. So I'm going to share 3 groups of 4. I'm not sure if that spacing is quite accurate, but we'll go with it for today. Okay, so our next question we're going to dive into is 3 times 8. So those thinking brains out. 3 times 8. What is it and how do you know? Okay, does someone, oh, I'm seeing lots of conversation in the chat, loving that. Does someone want to unmute and share how they know 3 times 8?
I can share.
Awesome, thanks.
I was thinking about so keeping in mind what we just did, I thought of 2 sets of 3 groups of 4.
Oh, so you knew that it was a whole other set of 3 groups of 4? So kind of like that?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And I saw in the chat, thanks for sharing that. And I saw in the chat somebody noticed that it doubled because 4 was double 8. Thanks, Sandra, for highlighting that. So this one here doubled. And so we all feel at this point in our community, it's 24. Let's check out our next question. 6 times 8. I wonder if we might consider some of those strategies that were shared from Sandra. And is it Mia? Is that how you say it? Mia? Yeah, Mia. Oh, I'm seeing a double again. And so at this point in the conversation, if I was in a class, I'd probably insert a turn and talk. I can also tell by all of your enthusiasm in the chat, those answers coming in, that we all are noticing that pattern and have lots to share about. Does someone want to share just orally what they're thinking about?
Yeah, I just use that double strategy, and I never really thought about it that way in terms of just the double from the 3 to the 6 and then just double the other one, right? So that was a different way. So of all my years on the planet, that's the first time I've thought about it doing that way, which is interesting. So you can learn continuously.
So you took that original one and then you doubled it down this way. Like so? Okay. And so we'll put 48 in there. Okay, here comes your next question. Twelve times 4. I've seen some expressions out there. Ooh. So first, just I want to really notice and name that joy that I'm really seeing out there, the curiosity, the engagement. Yeah, math is fun.
Rachel, do you want to talk about your thinking?
Yeah.
I just realized it's not actually half 4. So to get to the 12, you double the 6, but to get to the 4, you half the 8. So you're doubling and then halving, so you're equal to the 48 from before. That is not how I do any of my normal math thinking.
Oh, interesting. Learning with and from one another. So fun. Thinking about the joy and engagement this is bringing us. So you told me that you noticed that the 6, so if I take the 6 from our one over here, the 6, it doubled. And then you kind of cut this one in half. It's almost like you went like this. You chopped this in half to be 4, took this box over here and just moved it right down here to get your 12, kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly. But kind of like Brett was saying, that this is not how I would normally solve it. But because of the way we're working through this, that was the first thing that I saw immediately.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just loving, again, whose voices are being heard in this, right? We'll just take a pause moment to think through all of those voices, and just that changed thinking, right? Our openness to thinking about things in a different way, thinking about different relationships between numbers. And so let's have a look at this next one here. 24 times 2. No, I should put, oh, and we all agreed that that was 48. It was the same. So Brett's saying again, 48, same as before. Does somebody want to share their thinking out loud or their noticings? Same as
That's
again,
what
you can see these. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi. I thought that the doubles trick was really cool, and I didn't even think of it because I'm really tired right now. And so I'm like, oh, a trick. Cool. Now I'm awake. I can do this. And then when it got a little hard for my brain, I'm like, I have to go back to how I normally do it. And so at 12 times 4, I worked it out by doubling 12s and then doubling it. And so I'd already done what you're doing, leading us to with the 24 times 2.
Okay,
So I didn't even look at pictures right now. All I can do is look at the numbers and go, okay, this is what I do, and stick with my train because I have a tired train today.
Yeah. And I love that. And so some of us are entering with so many different perspectives and entry points, right? We're having a tired day, we're having an exciting day, and this is remotivating us. And so just honoring all of the different ways that we can enter it. And you don't have to use the pictures and the models that I've drawn, but lots of children will go back to these and will rely on these to further consolidate their thinking. So Donna, you were saying you used the 12 times 4 to help you figure this out, or you didn't use that relationship at all?
When I did 24 times 2 to figure out my 12 times 4.
Ah, okay. So if I drew that down here, it would be like 24.
Yeah, because I doubled 12 because that's easy for my head to do. And then I just did it twice. Yeah, like that.
Yes, you almost went back this way.
Yep.
Okay, nice. Yeah. And then you're 12. So you knew this was 48 because you'd already done it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then I saw Sandra comment in the chat as well. It's the same as before. You can see the pattern. And so I'm wondering if that pattern can help us solve other problems. And here's our last problem. I wonder if that pattern can help us solve it. 3 times 16. 3 times 16. Getting some 48s. Does anyone want to share how they figured that out or what they used to figure that out? Yeah, Leyton, go for it.
Yes. I went back to my favorite strategy, actually, and I went 3 times 10 is 30 and 3 times 6 is 18 and added them together. And then I went back and said, wait a second, I think we've done 3 times 8 before. And so I did 3 times 8 plus 3 times 8. But initially I went back to my 3 times 10 is 30 plus 3 times 6 is 18.
Okay. And then, sorry, so that's what you did initially. And then you went back and said, wait a second, where did you go back to?
Remember how we did 3 times 8 before?
Oh yeah,
So
okay.
I went 16 is 2 8s. So I went 3 times 8 is 24, and then 3 plus 3 times 8 is 24. So I did my normal way, and then I went back and said, there's a pattern here. I'll use that too.
Okay, nice. So you noticed that double pattern again that you could use in that helper problem. Sandra, are you feeling brave? Could you share? I'm putting her on the
Sure.
spot. Same idea.
I saw the same thing that Leyton did. So that's what I thought. I thought of 16 as 2 chunks of 8 and 8. And I already knew that 3 and 8 was 24. So then I just doubled it. But I also double checked in my head. And I do love to use that same strategy that Leyton used, where I made 16. I pulled it into 10 and 6. And so I know that 3 times 10 is 30. And 3 times 6 is 18, and I added the 2 together.
Okay, so you kind of use both those strategies to double check there.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, okay. 3 times 10. I'm seeing some connections between ideas too in the chat, which is always fun. Okay. Did anyone notice a connection between our question here, our 6 times 8, and our 3 times 16? So in this moment in a class, I would probably invite a turn and talk and see if the kids are noticing those patterns and those relationships between the numbers. And so just honoring that we all had so many interesting ways of looking at those numbers, and hearing from each of us re-inspired new ideas and ways of thinking about numbers, whether it affirmed what you were already thinking or challenged something new. And so thinking about how we can bring those pedagogies of voice into our classrooms through a math lens can be a lot of fun and really motivating for us as educators, as well as the children in our classes. I think I'll finish with, those are some other examples of how we might share in the children's thinking, and how we might document that thinking and make it visible so that everybody can root back into what's been shared and allow their voice to come forward. And so when we do math talks, it's essential that we do create that recording of thinking so that children have something to talk about. They don't have to just hold it in their working memory, and they can really connect to each other's ideas and thinking. And so I think I'll kind of whip through some of the talk moves and not go through all of them in depth. But in order to facilitate this kind of culture in our classroom, I've relied on a book called Classroom Discussions Using Math Talk to Help Students Learn. And so these are some of the practices that they offer in the book to bring forward student voice. So practices like turn and talk, helping children take those risks in a low stake environment and really build their confidence with their thinking. Strategies like pressing the children for reasoning. Tell me more about that. Why do you think that? What relationships are you noticing? And so really asking the children to sort of justify their thinking mathematically. And often now children will say, without even saying the answer in our math class, they'll just start talking about, well, I think it's this because, and they just share all of their later thinking beyond that. And so using the revoicing, you heard me do that a few times throughout, just validating those ideas that are shared and really helping celebrate those ideas, and also sometimes clarifying them for others in the community to experience. And then adding on, we didn't experience this one in a ton of depth today, but allowing children to add on to each other's ideas can really help them develop an understanding of those relationships with their numbers, using their own funds of knowledge to bring forward. Oh, I think I skipped one. We'll skip that one for now. And then asking children if they agree or disagree with that thinking. Sometimes when we invite this conversation, we do need to really talk about what it means to disagree respectfully. And one of the ways I like to do that is to allow children permission to always change their thinking. And so in math, we can change our thinking. And so when a child offers a disagreement, we can then offer up a opportunity to change your thinking. Do you want to change your thinking? Do you want to stick with your thinking? And so it's less of a mistake or a wrong answer. It's just that shift and move in thinking. And so that brings us to our wrap up. And I'll give you a moment to process and personalize. What ahas are you generating? What might this look like in your context? And how might you invite more voice into our numeracy spaces and classrooms? And you can type that into the chat.
Thank you, Kendra. I'm going to pass this back to Tammy as people do that.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, everyone. I just want to say special thanks to Kendra. Math wasn't always my favorite, and I love when we share accessible, inclusive strategies for all. Just a reminder, folks, that we are back on April 29th. Our topic is looking at a trauma-informed practice. We have Denise Augustine, Nikki Lynham, and Christy Livingston. So we hope you will be back to join us. A reminder that this will come out probably in about a week so that you can review it if you would like and share it with friends. Please invite others to join us. I think the best thing in this work is the learning and growing together. So thanks so much to everyone who shared today. We appreciate your voices and the way that we continue to elevate each other in the province. So have a great night. Leyton, would you like the last word?
Yay us, everybody. Come on, February, we did it. Take good care, everybody. We so appreciate you, and thanks to all of our presenters, and thank you to each of you for creating the energy together in this work. We appreciate your voices and lifting up the voices of your students.